This is TV Podcast Industries, and this is our Star Trek Picard premiere podcast. Welcome back, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. This is TV Podcast Industries, and we're here to talk about the Star Trek Picard European premiere and preview the series. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Trekkies. Yes, I am one of your other hosts, John. I never thought I would be saying fellow Trekkies. We've had fellow Watchers, fellow Witchers, fellow Defenders, fellow Gothamites, but yes, now it's on to the Star Trek universe.
Yes.
So welcome, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers.
Yes.
Is that a thing?
It is, absolutely, yes. The name was changed back in the 90s. I remember it changed over to Trekkers, and then the old guard, the people that only liked the original series, wanted to maintain themselves as Trekkies. But I think everybody should be brought together by Star Trek Picard, the follow-up, I suppose, or the semi-sequel to The Next Generation, starring Jean-Luc Picard, played by Sir Patrick Stewart. And I was lucky enough to get to see the European premiere of Star Trek Picard in London.
Yes.
Yeah, last week. So to get us ready for Star Trek Picard, we will be talking about three things on this episode. We'll be talking about the European premiere of Star Trek Picard, which took place in London this week. We'll be talking about the two of the 3-issue comic book series, Star Trek Picard Countdown, and we'll be talking about the Star Trek short trek Children of Mars. We'll be going into full spoiler-filled detail on all of those things, but we won't be spoiling the episode of Star Trek Picard. I am not allowed.
Well, boo hiss, Derek, because yes, we would love for you to spoil everything about that premiere, but I know you're on deep lockdown from Amazon Prime, so yes, I won't be asking any probing questions about that. But except for overall, you know, an impression, you know, I presume it was a good atmosphere at the premiere with the white carpet, not the red carpet.
Yep.
Certainly on social media, we saw Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart having a fabulous time with a proposal of marriage, a brief kiss on the lips. But it looks exciting. I think one of the underground stations, you did a selfie there. Yeah. I think instead of Piccadilly Circus, it was Picard-illy Circus.
It was, absolutely. Yeah, loads of great stuff that we'll be talking about in our discussion about the European premiere. Yeah, absolutely. Let's kick off right there. The Piccadilly station, which I thought was a great installation from the PR team. Effectively, you arrive at Piccadilly station, every sign has been changed. The signs above every door and every exit have been changed to there's posters everywhere. The trailer for the show is playing everywhere, and you're welcomed by Sir Patrick Stewart to the station as Jean-Luc Picard, telling you to mind the gap.
Excellent stuff. No, that's really good. Yeah. I'm in nerd heaven just at that. I think.
Really good
fun. No, really good.
I arrived a little bit early into London. I flew in the day of the premiere. Arrived a little bit early into London, and I decided to go out of my way to go over to Piccadilly Station. It was actually a completely different line. If you know the tube system in London, there's various different lines. I went onto a completely different line just to get to Piccadilly Station and take my nerd photograph.
Well, it's great that London embraced, or at least Leicester Square, and the fans and the London Underground system embraced the premiere of Star Trek Picard. And of course, I think we are recording this with literally about a week to go.
Yeah.
Just under a week to go till it premieres on Wednesday, the 22nd of January in the US. And then we all get it on Amazon Prime on Thursday, the 23rd, where we can engage with the Picard series. I'm really looking forward to it. So I can't wait for us to cover this, for sure. It should be really good. I really enjoyed the Discovery, Star Trek Discovery that was done as well. I love how they are really upgrading the Star Trek world, at least in terms of special effects, but also, just making it maybe, dare I say it, for a science fiction series, it feels more real. It definitely does. But then, having said that, Next Generation felt real to me in the 90s when I was watching it. It was really good. I think the main thing is it's just making it sort of consistent and comparable with what people maybe expect from television these days. It's becoming more serialized, less episodic. It's certainly, special effects are up there with the films. If I read the reports right as well, I think Patrick Stewart said as well, with this 9-episode series, that it is like a film script that he feels he's done here, and a film set that he's on. So that's great stuff, that the production is of that quality as well. So Derek, what were your thoughts on the event overall?
I really enjoyed the event overall. It was an interesting thing to do. I haven't been to a premiere for quite a while. I think the last time I was at a premiere in London was for Gotham, many, many years ago, in a much, much smaller theatre. This was held at Leicester Square, where the premieres of things like the Star Wars movies always happen. You see the red carpets and you see people all around sharing and sharing the fandom for it and that kind of stuff. This was a bit different. It's a TV show, obviously, so a little bit different, but Star Trek has its own brand itself. It's had movies as well in the past, obviously. So it does have a lot of fans. What we had was a kind of a double queuing system. You had the press on one side and you had fans on the other side. You had the arrival of all of the stars of the show, and they went up and down the lines with the fans, taking selfies and getting signatures done and taking photographs of the press, taking photographs for the press. The press don't usually take selfies with the stars of the show, of course. But in attendance at the event, we had the main stars. We had Patrick Stewart, Issa Briones, who plays the new character Daj. We have Michelle Hurd, who plays Raffi Mussaker, another new character. Evan Avagoria, who plays Elnor, another one of the new characters. Harry Treadaway, John, who I know you'll be talking about very soon, formerly of Penny Dreadful.
Yes.
He's joined the show as a character called Narek.
And of course his brother was in Attack the Block as well.
That's right.
Because I was always getting confused that Harry Treadaway was also in Attack the Block, but it's not. It's his brother.
It's his
or
brother.
Dare I say, twin brother.
That's right, yeah. We also had Jonathan Del Arco, who fans of Star Trek Next Generation would recognize this guy. He played a character called Hugh, who was a Borg who separated from the Borg collective. There's going to be loads of species and stuff that you may remember and may not, but the Borg were the big villains of the later series of Star Trek.
You must remember the Borg. I mean, and I have to say, I always remember that. Those episodes with Hugh or Huey.
Just you.
I always called him Huey, because I think ultimately that was I found it massively cute at the time that he kind of attached to Picard as his father figure. And I think the separation that they had to go through, I thought that was really sad. So I can't wait to see old Huey the Borg back in town, to be honest.
Speaking of another Borg that got separated from the collective, probably a more well-known character to everybody else. 7 of 9, a character well-known from Star Trek Voyager, played by Jerry Ryan, is also returning for the show, and was at the premiere as well. So very cool to see her there. Very interesting to see her interact in future with the captain of the Enterprise, because they never actually got to work together when they were on their shows in the past. But it's been 25 years since Star Trek Voyager premiered, and 25 years, roughly 20 years actually, I think, since the last Star Trek movie starring Patrick Stewart as well. So it's been a long time since these characters actually were in their universes. So really intriguing to see how they all get together. Also, the executive producers were there. We had Christian Bale, Alex Kurtzman, Akiva Goldsman, and Michael Chabon were there as well. And on the white carpet, as John mentioned already, we had got Sirian McKellen, and one of your favourite actors as well turned up. You said you were a fan of Star Trek Discovery. Jason Isaacs was also there, who played Captain Lorca on the first season of Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, Great stuff. He's
so much fun with the fans because everybody knows him because he's been in so many things. He was in the Harry Potter franchise, that kind of stuff. So if you've been in Harry Potter and you're in London, you're going to get shouted at by fans. You should have seen the reaction from people when he arrived. Everybody was cheering for him and asking him to come over and take selfies. And he was kind of like, give me a second. I got to just talk to these people first. I'll get there. And I think because he's played villainous characters in the past as well, it kind of gives him license to be a little bit more standoffish or telling people to just wait their turn. It goes down really well with fans when people can kind of have that interaction as well.
Good fun then.
Yeah, that was great fun to see that there. We were kind of ushered past that a little bit. We had tickets to the premiere. I brought along one of our friends, John, two-time BAFTA award-winning Tim Duck, who was my cameraman for the evening, as my camera died, unfortunately, just before going in. So he's taken some lovely photographs that are up in our group, over in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. You see some photographs there from the premiere that Tim took.
Yes, excellent stuff for the Duckmeister to be on call there in London for the premiere.
Yeah. And it was really nice. We were ushered into the theatre. It was a very cold night outside. They all kept mentioning, I think they'd had the LA premiere a couple of nights beforehand. And Patrick Stewart was talking about the fact that, he doesn't think he's ever walked a premiere line where he had to have hand warmers in his hands, but they were lovely and toasty, he said.
Well, he's getting on, he is 79. So, definitely, it's fantastic to see him doing this. And it's fantastic that he's reprising Jean-Luc Picard. I am beyond excited for this series. I really can't wait. And I think as well, just whilst we're here, just to say, the Star Trek Picard will be releasing weekly on Amazon Prime from the 23rd of January in Europe. And of course, we will then discuss each episode in spoiler-filled detail after it comes out. So our podcast will drop on a weekly basis. And that is my favorite sort of podcasting.
Absolutely.
Weekly basis. You can interact with the fans. It has time to digest. So just fellow Trekkies, remember, our podcast will be coming out on a weekly basis as we cover Star Trek Picard.
And as usual, we do want to hear your thoughts on the episodes. Make sure you email them to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com or pop over to our Facebook group. And we should have a spoiler post up each week where you can leave your thoughts about the episodes as well. As I said, I'm not going to be able to review the episode. What I will say is I'm really looking forward to watching the first episode with John. I want to see your reaction. I want to hear Chris's reaction, and I want to hear the reaction of everybody else. I was not disappointed. There you go.
Excellent stuff.
There you go.
Excellent stuff. Yeah, that's really good to hear. I'll have to try and tease out some spoilers from you over the course of the next week. Purely confidential, of course.
Absolutely. Genuinely, John has gotten zero spoilers from me about the episode because there's lots of nice twists and turns in there that I was pretty surprised about, I suppose, and I don't want anybody to not be surprised by the twists and turns in the episode. What we did get was a Q&A inside the theatre exclusively for the people that had watched the premiere. They have asked us not to spoil anything to do with the episode, obviously, but there were some questions that were asked and some answers that were given, which were specific spoilers about the episode. So I'm not going to talk about those, but some of the interesting things that I thought out of the premiere, some of the interesting things I wanted to kind of talk about here. Patrick Stewart specifically welcomed everybody in there and just thanked all of the fans for their support over the many, many years and wants everybody to give this show a chance. He says it's a brand new thing for Star Trek. It's not something that he would have returned for if it was going to be season 8 of The Next Generation, because he feels he's well gone past that time. He felt he would only come back for something brand new for the character. He specifically talks about being visited by the executive producers who he said, invite them to my house so we can have dinner and I can tell them no to their face. Because I wouldn't want to let them down over the phone. I wouldn't want to send them an email saying I'm not going to do it. Send them over to the house. We'll have a chat and I'll be able to tell them no when they get there. He said they just talked and talked and talked. And he kind of feels they wore him down a little bit. And when they eventually went, he said, I'm kind of interested in what you've got. If you have any information that you could write down, and I'll read through it and I'll see what I think of the concept once you've written it down. But it's still a no at the moment. 2 days later, in the post, you received a 35-page document with their take on the world of Picard and what's happened to the Starfleet since everything had happened back in the day with the Next Generation. And he said he was sold instantly on that point. Once he got that document, he said, I realize now that the treatment that they want to do with the character, and it's something I'm up for. So that I thought was really fascinating.
No, that's great, because when you get that buy-in or re-buy-in to a property that certainly, a lot of people have done for a long time and maybe have been welcome of the break from it, even though, they will still love their time on it. To get that buy-in, I think is really great to get it from the actors.
Yeah, and the executive producers constantly, when they were asked questions about the setting of the show and how it was going, a lot of them were basically saying that it was kind of a cue from Patrick Stewart himself and his way of approaching the character, that they wanted to make sure that they were respectful of what he was trying to do with the character. So it was a collaborative process. He is in fact an executive producer himself on the show. His credit does show up on screen, so he has a lot of input into the show. And it felt like a passion project. The way he was talking about it, he seemed massively passionate. I think the way he described it was, when you watch the first episode, we want Star Trek fans to watch it, and we want people who've never been interested in Star Trek or thought it wasn't for them to watch it. And if you don't like it at the end of the first episode, watch the second one. And if you don't like it at the end of that one, give us a chance to the end of the series until you understand the whole story that we're telling, so that you can see what we're trying to get on screen. He doesn't feel like the old days where you can watch 3 episodes of the serialized show and then not come back to it. He feels like this is one full story that's being told with the first season of the show.
That definitely makes sense, I think, with modern TV, it being much more serialized. The arc of the story, the nuance of it is over the full series. There is payoff along the different episodes, whereas obviously Next Generation, as well as Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and the original Star Trek, they were much more episodic. Yes, they had maybe 2 or 3 episode arcs sometimes, but that's certainly the way it's going for this kind of event television now, know? So, that's, yeah, I'm, again, beyond excited. Yeah. And I hope that our discussions of this, on a weekly basis certainly, do it justice. And of course, fellow Trekkies, if you are joining us for the first time, remember you can pop over to our website to go to any Starfleet supporting podcast player of your choice. Remember, please share the podcast, leave a review, rate us, and join us for this epic journey into space, with feedback of all sorts, because one of the great things about the Star Trek community is the fandom, is the community. So yeah, I cannot wait to hear people's thoughts on Picard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you're reading my notes, John, because you've hit on another one here. There's other returning characters, as we mentioned, Jerry Ryan and Jonathan Del Arco, who played Hugh on the original Next Generation. One of the things he was talking about was, you get into such a ride, you kind of you suddenly hit this massive fandom when you become part of Star Trek. And he says from the moment he appeared on screen in the original episode, I think it was I, Borg was the name of the episode, when he originally appeared on there, the fans have always reached out to him and always followed his career from that point onwards. And he felt like he wanted to really do them justice by coming back and playing this role as well. Jerry Ryan described it as jumping on a freight train where you don't know how fast it's going, and it just goes and goes and goes. Her career completely took off from that point, and it's always been a credit to Star Trek. She did joke about the fact that 2 years ago she was one of the first actresses to hear about the role, that she could have been involved in Star Trek Picard. And about 2 years ago it was proposed to her by one of the executive producers. I think Alex Kurtzman is the one that proposed it to her. It was proposed to her event, and she just went, that's never going to happen. There's no way you're going to get Patrick Stewart back to do it.
Excellent stuff.
And then about a year later, she was at an event just before San Diego Comic-Con, I think she said, where Alex Kurtzman came back up to her again and said, we've been talking about you so much in the writer's room. Your character is going to be so important to the series. And she went, oh, I guess I'm doing that thing then. So I think it's really good fun. So she loved being there. She loved working with Patrick Stewart, and he really was very complimentary to those two actors, particularly about them coming back into these roles.
Well, I definitely think, I can't wait to see that interaction between Seven of Nine and Jean-Luc Picard. Certainly just because Jean-Luc Picard, Next Generation, and Seven of Nine from Voyager, bringing those two different parts of the Star Trek universe together as well through these two actors is going to be fascinating. Yeah. And again, with with Hugh. Just, it's one of my favorite episodes. So I'm really pleased about that. And I suspect, obviously, maybe is a pupil of Seven of Nine, or they are part of a, dare I say it, collective of individuals of previous Borg species. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I'm making this up as I go along, but I can't wait to see these returning characters. Yeah. And I can't wait to see the new characters make their stamp in the Star Trek world as well, and see what they're about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the things I really want to see is how Seven of Nine has changed since that show ended. I think that's going to be really interesting to see, because she had separated herself and spent a lot of time with the characters on Voyager. So I'm intrigued to see how her life has changed over, again, 20 years since she appeared as the character. Some of the new characters, really quickly, I'm not going to go too in depth in this because I don't want to give any spoilers for what might have been on screen. Issa Briones, who plays Daj, seemed to have such a fun time on the show. She's one of the youngest people on the show, and she seemed to be really enjoying her experience there. Evan Longoria, who plays a new character called Elnor, he seemed a little bit elf-like in the trailer footage that we saw. He's not in the first episode, which is not a spoiler, but he's in the trailer. He seems a little bit like Legolas, is the way he looks. He is a Romulan, and he's a very different type of Romulan than we've seen in the past. The Romulans are like the Vulcans, but a very secretive race. They've always been enemies of the Federation, of Starfleet. They've always been enemies of all the ships in Star Trek, I suppose. Let's break it down to there.
Oh, but I love the Romulans. I always feel they've been given a bit of short shrift certainly in the movies. Apart from maybe Shinzon, who I think was kind of a Romulan kind of hybrid.
He was a clone of Picard, yes.
But with Romulan blood as well. Yeah. I think they've always been given short shrift in the movies. And I think, unlike something like the Cardassians or the Klingons.
Kardashians, not the Cardassians, because the Cardassians are the very popular reality TV
stars. The Cardassians. Yes, the Cardassians and the Klingons obviously have always, I feel much more immersed in their culture in the Star Trek universe, more so than the Romulans, but I've always enjoyed seeing the Romulans on screen interacting with Starfleet, and certainly their warships are pretty cool with the kind of green glow about them. So I've always enjoyed the Romulans. So it's great to see that there are Romulans in this, which that's not a spoiler as such, because it is hinted at within the 2-issue comic series as well, that has been published on IDW Comics. As part of this sort of lead-in to the new series as well.
We will be talking about that in our preview in just a couple of minutes as well, about the comic books that have come out. Just to mention again, Harry Treadaway is the other Romulan character in the show. I just thought it was quite interesting because he is a well-known actor now. He's done some very high-profile shows and movies in the past. So interesting getting him on board. He said he really knew nothing about Star Trek, and he took that as his kind of prize, that he was coming into the show not knowing much about Star Trek. But when he got the role and when he got the call saying that they were interested in bringing him on board, I like this. He said he sat outside looking up at the stars and asked them to give him an overview of the Star Trek that he was coming into, what the history of it was, and what this show would do differently to it in the past. And he said he was actually staring at the stars the whole 20 minutes or 30 minutes as he was getting a description of this universe. And he said it really kind of helped place him in this world, which I just thought was quite nice, because, you hear the idea of, NASA scientists being inspired by Star Trek, that whole concept of people looking at the stars and wondering what's out there, being inspired by this sci-fi show, because it is different from normal sci-fi, I would find, and a lot of people would say it's a very inspirational type of show. So
yeah, I mean, that seems like a very actory thing to say, to be honest. Not saying that it's not true, but certainly I think seeing the poetry and the circumstance as you're being offered a job looking up at the stars is far removed from how us plebs would normally get jobs.
Well, I liked Asa Briones when she was saying that she got the job. She just said she screamed, and then her mom screamed, and then she ran around the house really happy with herself.
Fantastic.
The final actor that was there is Michelle Hurd. Now, she is supposed to be very central to the show. We will actually talk about her character, Rafi Mussaker, when we talk about the 2-issue comic books, because her character is quite central in there. She does have a pre-existing relationship with Picard, but is not in the first episode, unfortunately. But she seems like a really interesting actor. You've probably seen her in a lot of other things before, but unfortunately we didn't get to see her in the first episode of the show. So really looking forward to seeing her on screen as it goes on. But overall, the event itself was really good. The Q&A was really interesting. It was about 20 or 30 minutes with all the cast. The one thing I thought was really good fun, Christian Bayer, one of the executive producers on the show, they constantly mentioned that when everybody in the writer's room hit a point and they needed an explanation to get them out of a situation they've written in, she was the one that would come up with the concept of how to get them out of it with an in-canon explanation of how they do something. Like, for example, if they said, this character needs to get the other side of space, but warp drive's not fast enough, what can we do? Christian Bayer would go, actually, back in the 60s they did this, or in Star Trek Voyager episode 12, they did this, and she'd come up with a perfect in-universe explanation as to how they would be able to get themselves out of their writer problems, as they said, which I thought was really good.
That's so good.
So, yeah.
So good.
I just really liked that kind of interaction with all of them. You know, she kind of even says herself, she's probably the encyclopedia for Star Trek for everybody to use as they want to.
And great to have someone like that on board for a Star Trek show. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Unfortunately, we're not going to have someone like that at our podcast. We're all Star Trek watchers. We all know the shows and we've seen most of them as well. But we're going to be coming at the show as TV watchers. You know, we've been talking about TV for over 400 episodes of our podcast, and we're really hoping that this show is going to stand up against all the other kind of shows that we've covered in the past. I think. Yeah, I mean, three of us are really excited to watch it.
I would say I'm a Trekkie light, to be honest, in that, you know, Star Trek has wonderful, fond memories. For me, watching the original series actually with my dad when it was replayed on BBC Two in the 80s. And like my dad absolutely loved it. Yeah. And then obviously there was the Next Generation, which felt like, you know, the Star Trek of my time. And I loved that as well. And my dad did as well. Mm-hmm. And then you got Deep Space Nine. It was a different take. And then Voyager. And I've always watched them. I'm just not an encyclopedic Britannica when it comes to all things Star Trek. I have my, you know, favorite characters, my favorite moments, my favorite episodes, but I'm not well read up on the on the lore of Star Trek, really, except for maybe the, you know, the main points around Starfleet and so on. But like, yes, I cannot wait for this.
So that's where our awesome listeners come in, because they always come in with the ideas and stuff that we miss out as well. So that's where you come in and you can tell us your thoughts and the things we missed on the episode. That's it really for the Picard premiere. I thought it was a really interesting event. What I thought was really interesting as well is just after we left, after watching the first episode of the show and the 20-minute Q&A, the entire red carpet and all of the staging had all been taken down and removed. We went outside and there was literally the builders were there just taking away the last bits and pieces of the stuff. It had all been taken down in about an hour.
Dare I say it, for another space-themed series and movie property, most impressive.
Yes, it was. Very impressive. That's it, as I said, for the premiere in London. We're going to go on and talk about some things to prep you for the series of Picard. There are a few things that have been released to tie into the show. There's a 3-issue comic book series, 2 issues that have been released so far. 1 issue, weirdly, was delayed to the 30th of January. I have an idea as to why it was delayed after watching that first episode, but I won't know until the 30th of January when that issue is released. But we are going to talk about the first 2 issues of this series because it does set up some characters and it sets up some ideas that will be carried into the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first issue begins with the arrival of 2 Romulans called Laris and Zeban at Jean-Luc Picard's vineyard in France. And there's this conversation between the 2 of them about not being welcome on Earth, and that Romulans have always been enemies of Earth, but they owe Jean-Luc Picard for the risks that he took to save them. And I think, just firstly for me, the thing that popped was Romulans.
Exactly.
Second thing, Romulans on Earth. Thirdly, what has Picard done for this sort of introductory situation, because it immediately then goes a year previously, and we begin to sort of delve into why you have two Romulans walking about on Earth, looking through the vines and discussing grapes and the vineyard at Jean-Luc's vineyard, and of course we go to a year previously where we have again little nod to Next Generation with Geordi LaForge there helping to build a whole new fleet of ships around the big Mars depot orbiting the planet there.
Yeah, that was quite interesting, wasn't it? Yeah, I totally agree with you that idea that having Romulans on Earth, you're instantly going, oh, how did this happen? Because last we saw, they were all enemies, effectively. So something must have happened between them. So that's really interesting. Yeah, Geordi LaForge helping build a new fleet of ships. What we find out is that Picard has been trying to evacuate the Romulans from their space for the previous 4 years because a supernova is about to destroy their entire race. So what Geordi LaForge is building is a fleet of ships to help get them out of there quickly. He's the one responsible to kind of build more and more ships to get out there and help out millions and billions of people that could need to get out of that system.
Yeah, it's a mass relief exercise from Starfleet. And I think one of the great things here from the comics is that it really kind of picks into the fact that it's hugely difficult because of this absolute fundamental distrust between the Romulans and the Federation.
Yeah.
And even just the idea that Romulans anyway are very secretive. There's a great moment where Jean-Luc Picard is going to help relieve a Romulan homeworld, as we're kind of led to believe, of about 10,000 Romulans. And there's all these secret passageways that he's escorted to meet the governor of that world, the Romulan governor. There's this kind of under the breath comment to Raffi Musiker from Picard saying, you know, there's no straight way to get to meet the Romulans. They always have these secret passageways. It's always like a maze in any of their buildings.
Exactly.
So that they can keep hiding things. They keep secrets from themselves, you know, all this kind of thing. So it really nice little kind of contextualization of the Romulans. And just, to be honest, refreshing me of the Romulan race. As I say, it is one of those races, I think, that, you know, I wish I'd seen more of in the TV shows.
Yeah, well, I think you're gonna like it when we get to Star Trek Picard as well. Yeah, I do really like that comment. It's like, of course it's going to be a secret door to get into the building. Of course it is, yeah. So yeah, let's talk quickly about Raffi Musiker. This is the first appearance we've seen of this character. Admiral Picard, as he is now, he's working on the USS Verity, which is the ship that he's on board. They make a casual mention to there being a new captain of the Enterprise. If he wants it back, the captain will hold on to the seat. They don't mention who that captain is in the comic book, as far as I could see. But they're on the USS Verity, and Raffi Musiker is his first officer. This is Lieutenant Commander Raffi Musiker. I think I wrote down that she's light on formality but very efficient was how I described her, because she keeps calling him JL instead of Jean-Luc. And he's kind of going, you're never going to call me Admiral, are you?
Yeah,
yeah.
And of course, with Patrick Stewart being a classically trained, rather trained Shakespearean, you know, a lot of Shakespearean productions under his belt, do you think he says, "Verity I say unto thee," when he speaks to his crew?
Perhaps he does.
On the USS Verity.
I'd say if he started every speech with that, they'd start to get a bit bored of him. But he could do one or two, right?
He could.
But both of them are going down to the planet to evacuate the people. They've been told there's 10,000 Romulans that need to get moved. I just think it's an interesting story, because again, we get the secretive nature of the Romulans. We have Governor Shiana. She's their contact and kind of divulges that the planet is basically one massive vineyard for Romulan drinks. Most popular Star Trek drink, I think it's known as the Romulan Ale, which gets everybody drunk instantly. So that might be what they're producing there. Picard thinks it's really interesting that the planet is very similar to his own vineyard, the Chateau Picard that he has at home in France. So he kind of thinks it's really interesting that in Romulus, or in the Romulan system, they have vineyards just like he has back in France, effectively. And then suddenly notices that there seems to be some native people that are working on these vineyards that he's never even been told about. And then finds out there's over 5 million of them on the planet who the Romulans are not expecting to be evacuated because they're a lower class of life form.
Exactly. I think the vineyard owner says it would be like evacuating the trees and the grasses. They're primitive, leave them to it.
Yeah. I think this is what I like about the story, because this is kind of a classic Picard moment. This is something that he just couldn't possibly entertain even as a concept. The idea of evacuating just the Romulans, the idea of choosing one race over another and saying which one's more important. It's absolutely fundamentally against everything that Picard has lived for and done in his entire life. You know, he's been working with them for 4 years. He knows how difficult these people are, but he can't possibly accept that this would be something that he would be able to do.
Yeah, I think they really capture Jean-Luc Picard really well. You know, he refuses to evacuate just the Romulans, and he needs more time to assess evacuating 5 million natives as well. And as a result, he gets imprisoned as the, you know, quote unquote guest by the governor, Shiana. And you have this great moment where he's in prison where, you know, he questions his intellect, his reasoning, why he's made that decision. He goes, you know, I'm a fool. I've trusted these Romulans. And before that, he was being told that they were more open, less secretive than maybe the homeworld of Romulus. And then, you know, the redemption of an old enemy in my own abilities, in the righteousness of my cause. You know, I think Picard can come across as very righteous. And, you know, I think it's really interesting hearing him question that, you know, and he just is concerned that all is for naught. And I love just that kind of inner monologue with Picard and him having those thoughts. And I think the other great thing is this is the backdrop of all of this is this supernova where I think earlier in the comic he talks to Geordie LaForge saying, you know, it's an unseen clock. They think it's a year away until the supernova goes, but they just don't know. But they know that it's ticking down. And there's this reference to the unseen clock, which I think is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be the next week kind of thing. And everybody's trying to work around the Romulans. You know, there's this thing they mentioned early on in the issue where they can't even scan the planets. They didn't know until they got to the planet that there were 5 million people there, because they're not even being allowed to scan the planets to help these people out, because they're worried that the Federation are using this as a ruse to learn everything about the Romulans. You know, that's how untrusting these people are. So, unsurprising that he ends off in prison at the end of the first issue, along with Raffi, his first officer. Let's get into the second issue, because it really does continue directly on from the previous issue. We have his first officer, Raffi, still under guard while Admiral Picard tries to convince the Romulan governor to make arrangements to evacuate the native population. She completely refuses, and there's an uprising from the natives themselves where they overthrow the Romulans, set fire to the vineyard, and release Captain Picard, who in turn releases Raffi and brings her along with him.
Yes, and this daring escape brings them to, it's almost like a natural temple that the native people have, where the waterfall is going upwards rather than falling. It's going up towards the sky. This waterfall type of natural feature deep within a kind of a mountainside in a cave. Yeah. In this,
what would you call that? It's like a waterfall, obviously, because the water falls. Water jump or water?
Yeah, water jump, I think. Okay. Water rises.
Water rise. A water rise.
A water rise. Okay. And the native people bring them into this natural feature. But this is where Picard and Raffi then meet two rogue Romulans who have been helping them. And this is the two that we see right at the start of the first issue, Laris and Zaban, on Earth, going through the vineyards at Picard's vineyard. Yes. So it's a nice little touchback here in the second issue to that opening page of issue 1.
So now we know how they met, and we know that Picard is obviously going to save the two of them. That's how they become or develop that relationship, I suppose. But they do reveal that they are members of the Tal Shiar and that the two of them fell in love with each other. Now, the Tal Shiar is an organization that we saw a lot in The Next Generation. They're like the kind of secret police of the ruling government of Romulans. They're sent in to take out anybody that could possibly be against the ruling government. So if you're reading a comic book and you don't know much about Star Trek and the words Tal Shiar appear in front of you, you go, what could that possibly be? Well, it's quite a massive thing that these two people would be even aligning themselves at all with anybody outside of the Romulans, and that these two have fallen in love with each other is a massive thing because these guys are the secret police. They're like the Gestapo.
Yeah, exactly. That they're going against the code of the Tal Shiar in falling in love, as well as then actively aiding an uprising, or at least the breakout of Picard and Raffi from the ruling classes here on the planet. So yes, they would seemingly seem to be going rogue. But again, you know, it's still not entirely sure. Are they deep undercover? Is this a ruse? You know, as I say, at the end of issue 1, you've got this questioning of Picard about being too trusting. And I think this plays out here in this meeting as well.
Yeah, because in the second issue, he's kind of questioning whether he should trust them at all, really. And then in the other side of the story, Governor Shanna is contacting the Verity to tell them that Picard and Raffi have been killed in the uprising, and they need to be transported away because the uprising has left them with lots of injured people, and they need to be transported aboard the USS Verity so they can contact the High Command, effectively, the command structure of the Romulans. I think I might have done a Klingon one there. I know Klingons have a High Command, but I guess the Romulans also have a High Command as well.
Yeah, they must do.
But they're brought on board, and, you know, as they are the untrustworthy Romulans, they effectively break into the system and take control of the ship.
Yes, so unfortunately the poor commander that's been left instead of Raffi has really just done a massive boo-boo. Mm-hmm. I am actually surprised that I know Federation as such is not a military presence, and certainly the Verity probably isn't a military ship.
Yeah,
but
ship, yeah.
I'm still slightly concerned when the person left in command allows a known enemy of the Federation of secretive, duplicitous intent towards the Federation access the main computer in the captain's ready room.
I think that's kind of the thing here, isn't it? Because there's one thing that the governor mentions as they make a connection. All they're doing is effectively making a phone call from the ready room, and they need to transfer a specific code in order to connect to the Romulans, but that's the ruse. And somebody has given them the information to allow them to hack into the computers. So they say, we need to make sure that we reward the person that gave us this information because it was good information. So who's that person? Is that going to be important in the third issue? So that'll be interesting to see.
Oh, well, my immediate theory is, could it be Raffi?
Maybe, because she's new, maybe.
No, because she's new, but again, maybe it's a ruse that her going to prison, and that's where she's able to pass it over.
Maybe.
Or maybe it is the two members of the Tal Shiar, Laris and Zaban, who have been rusing with the Federation as well.
Interesting, isn't it? And I did, again, think it was interesting because both of these issues came out. I think the first issue came out in the middle of November, second issue middle of December, third issue was expected to come out middle of January. It is called Star Trek Picard Countdown, so everybody was expecting that you'd have an issue that would lead directly into the show, and then they went, actually, it's not coming out till the 30th of January, so 2 weeks after the show premieres, or at least around the time the second episode premieres. So I think something's in that third and final issue that they don't want to get out before the second episode of the show comes out, that I think is happening, so we will see.
That makes sense to me, but I'm looking forward to seeing the conclusion of this story. It's a nice little warmer, getting back into the Star Trek universe and preparing you for Picard. It gives some nice background potentially of the show. Yep. As I say, I don't know because I've not seen the first episode, not seen the series, so it's just nice to connect back in with Picard in this different setting at this different time. And certainly it's good to see Geordie LaForge in here, because as we know from the trailer, other members of the USS Enterprise from the Next Generation will be making an appearance as well. So it's nice to have one of them make the appearance in the comic as well with Geordie LaForge.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what happens with those characters in issue 3. Our final piece that we're talking about for this preview of Star Trek Picard is the Star Trek short trek Children of Mars. The short treks have been, about 8 or 10 minutes episodes of Star Trek. Most of them have been shorts that have been connected to Star Trek Discovery, but we've had other ones. We've had ones that have just had Captain Pike and Spock in them, which aren't connected to Discovery at all, but have the characters from that show in them. This one is specifically connected to Star Trek Picard. If you get a chance to see it, I'm going to just say it straight up front, I think it's one of the best ones they've done. In fact, I think it's the best one they've done.
Me too. I've not been overly fussed on the short treks. This I kind of liked it because it took you out of space. It was just it centers around two 12-year-old classmates, Kima and Lil, that find themselves at odds with one another. It's like they're tripping one another up, they're fighting, they're giving each other a bloody nose, whether the blood is red or blue. And Kima's mother is working on Mars and has a great relationship with Kima. Lil's father is also working on Mars, but is stuck there. Like, the atmosphere is different, that he can't get back to Earth. He can't come back and see he's going to be away for another year because he is building a fleet of starships, which links then to Geordie's part in issue 1 of the comics, where they're preparing this fleet of starships to help the Romulans, and it's getting more and more hectic because Geordie is effectively trying to get these ships built and done in record time because of this unseen ticking clock that they're having to work against in order to save the Romulan race. But you see it play out, the two of them getting more and more frustrated with one another, and you really feel that this kind of hatred is the wrong word, but they don't like one another. You see that coming through, and it's really well done by the two actors.
Yeah, and I think what I like most about it is that you can see it's Lil having a bad day. One of the girls is having a much worse and much more difficult time with the fact that her father's not coming back. And she's the one that kind of kicks it all off. It's kind of one of those things where, if you walk into a puddle on your way to work in the morning, you're going to have a slightly worse day than someone that didn't. And that's kind of the way it looks. It's kind of that sliding doors effect. Both of them have exactly the same situation. Both of them have parents living on another planet who can't make it home. But Kima's kind of taken it in her stride. She has a really good relationship with her mother, whereas Lil she turns off the TV before her father even gets to say goodbye. Or I said TV there, I meant communication system.
Yes, exactly.
It looks like a TV, of course. But you see that because of that bad start to the day, effectively, that's where it's getting more and more aggressive. What's also interesting about the episode is it's 8 minutes long and it's mostly silent. It's mostly no dialogue, at least, between the characters. You hear some words spoken by other characters, but very little dialogue between the two of them. It is played out with a beautiful version of Heroes by David Bowie that's being played throughout most of the episode as well.
Yeah, which is almost like a silent little short. There's very little dialogue here. So, it's really, really good. But ultimately, the culmination in their sort of, in them butting heads and their fighting means that they're awaiting punishment in their school when news of an attack comes through on the screens by what are described as rogue synths on the planet Mars, where both their parents are stationed, and seeing the devastation of the attack on the starship dockyard, in effect, where they're being built, and the planet as well. And it really just finishes very nicely where the two of them hold hands as they realize that both their parents, no matter how the day started, are on the planet Mars at the dockyard, manufacturing the fleet of ships, and are effectively dead or in serious danger from this attack by the rogue synths, which does sound like a band.
It does. Sounds like a great band.
It sounds like sort of it would be a precursor to The Cure or something like that. It'd be great.
Absolutely.
We are the rogue synths, and this is
Cars. It is a really stunning kind of end to the episode because it's very evocative of 9/11, kind of those moments where we all were doing whatever we were going about doing, and then suddenly the news completely takes over everybody and every situation that's in there. It completely changes their day and probably their entire lives, because they both lost a parent, maybe their only parent, on this planet of Mars. What we see on the news screen, as John mentioned, is it's an attack by rogue synths. Synths are synthetics in this world. They're not synthesizers, John. Synthetics,
I know.
like Data, for example, like Lieutenant Commander Data was a very important part of the Next Generation. So you're wondering how synthetics could have gone so far away from Lieutenant Commander Data, who was
absolutely
almost considered a human by the end of the show. He was so similar. He was his own species effectively by the end of the show. So,
but yeah, again, it builds into the comics and gives us an idea of what is to come within the series, which is nice and tantalizing, I think, for sure.
And just a glimpse of Admiral Picard saying that he's devastated by the attack or devastated by the news. Just a moment where you've got him on screen as a massively important character in all across the universe. Effectively, he's asked for his comments on this attack. So interesting to see what's happening. The one thing, if you connect the two things we've just talked about there, the comic books and this short, the one thing that really worries me, think about what character we have sitting over the planet Mars that we all know and love. Geordi LaForge is on planet Mars seemingly when these attacks happen. If the comics
that is true.
are completely in canon and this TV episode is completely in canon, we may have just lost a major character in Star Trek history at this moment. That's the one thing that suddenly I was going, if they put him there in the comic and maybe he's back on Earth, maybe dealing with something else when this particular attack happens, we'll probably find out in the show. So let's see what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Cannot wait. I think with that, Derek, what's your overall excitement level for Star Trek Picard?
I cannot wait for this series to begin and get to see episodes weekly of another Star Trek show. I genuinely have absolutely loved Star Trek Discovery and what's happened every week on that show. It was one of the shows that I was waiting for every single week when it came out. And I know it's going to be the same with Star Trek Picard. I know I'm already feeling I can't wait for the second episode, and the first episode hasn't aired for everybody yet. I can't wait for the second episode. So there you go. John, after me telling you about the premiere that we've gone through and us talk about the comics and watching the short trek, what's your excitement level for Star Trek Picard?
I think even without the comics, even without the short trek, even without your lovely description of the premiere and the fact that I wasn't there, unfortunately, to be able to share that with you.
Don't worry, I had 2-time BAFTA award-winning Tim Duck with me, so that's okay.
I would be powering up my power cells to 11 on this for sure, so that we could go warp drive straight to the first episode. I really cannot wait. I am a massive, massive fan of Patrick Stewart, both in terms of him as Jean-Luc Picard in Next Generation, but everything he's done since and just the kind of person that he is. And so I cannot wait to see him with the other actors bringing this new story in the Star Trek universe to us, to be honest. I'm almost wondering, will there be a similar sort of pathos that we got in Logan when he did that kind of thing? Yeah. Not maybe continuously, but bring some element of that, because that was just wonderful what he did there with Hugh Jackman. And I get the sense that there may be a similar kind of feel of that character here, in what he wants to do. potentially by the end of the series, or at parts, not a continuous thing. So I am absolutely dialed up to 11 with my power cells.
Well, one thing I think that the executive producers said at the Q&A that I haven't mentioned that I really liked was they said, when you got to the end of Star Trek Insurrection, the one with Shinzon played by Tom Hardy in it, when you got to the end of that, Picard had a very clear idea of where he was going, and everybody generally in the fandom had an idea of where all of those characters were going now. We had Data, unfortunately, was gone. He'd sacrificed himself. We had B4, who was the other version of Data, a much more primitive version who'd kind of taken his spot. And everybody kind of went, okay, well, you can still continue with this cast. They're going to go off on new adventures. And what the executive producers were saying was, but what happens if your life doesn't turn out the way you expect it to? Like most lives do. This is what that story is. They all thought they had this trajectory in future. What actually happens if your life goes a different direction than you think, than everybody thinks it's going? So I kind of like that idea. So, I think you kind of hit something there, John, as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. We hope you are absolutely buzzing as well for Star Trek Picard, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. Please join us on our discussion podcasts of the series of Picard. You can send in feedback. We love to hear your feedback and thoughts. You can send that through email at feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. Join our Facebook group over on facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. And of course, if you can also send feedback through audio, you can leave it on our communicator. Just head on over to tvpodcastindustries.com and you can record up to 90 seconds of your thoughts on the week's episode. Just go to the right hand side tab to leave your audio feedback as well. We'd love to hear from everyone joining us for our discussions and for the show, Star Trek Picard.
Yes, thanks so much for joining us for this episode. As John said, you can subscribe over on tvpodcastindustries.com. If you want to support us, you can go over to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries. We know there are going to be so many podcasts about Star Trek out there. We're so glad you've chosen to come and join us for our episodes. So if you want to share it with your friends, make sure you share the podcast wherever you go on social media. Basically, we're available on all podcast catchers, so share it around. We'll be back with Picard on TV Podcast Industries after the first episode airs on the 23rd of January. Watch it and let us know what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to hear from you, fellow Trekkies.
Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, as always, fellow Trekkies, it is a pleasure speaking with you. And of course, remember to keep watching, keep listening, TV Podcast Industries. Bye.
Once he got that document, he said, I realize now that the treatment that they want to do with the character, and it's something I'm up for. So that what I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. And it's great when you get that buy-in from the lead actresses.
Synths are synthetics in this world. They're not synthesizers, John.
I'm doing a Chris there.
That thing that's going to be edited out before the episode comes out. I like it.